So once again, welcome to the Rio Grande ATP Emotional Healing Lecture Series. Lawrence, who's the CEO of Rio Grande, and myself as the clinical director, as well as the founder and director of Golden Willow Retreat, about before COVID. So about 4 years ago, we realized a lot of the world we get into, we need to get education out there. If people can be speaking the same language and releasing stigmas and learning more about themselves as well as communities and sobriety and all the different ways and emotional healing, it'd be worthwhile. So Lawrence and I got together. We decided to come up with a series that we continued through COVID, thanks to Zoom. And so we decided to do this. We have different speakers. It's not always me. And we do this 3 to 4 times a year, and I'm glad you're here, just so you know that. And this year I decided for the end of the year that we do something called Nurturing the 4 Quadrants of Life for Emotional Sobriety. And thank you, Rio Grande, for letting me do this and for letting us talk about something in a broader form that might be able to help us. So let's get going, Melissa. And so I want to thank Rio Grande ATP, who has been so involved, and Lawrence as the CEO. I also want to just give out a shout out to all of the providers as well as the participants. It takes a lot. It takes a lot of bravery. It takes a choice to be here, even if someone doesn't feel they need to be here. And I watch amazing providers working so hard to try to help someone improve their quality of life. And Rio Grande hired me 5 years ago on a 3-month contract. And like I said, that was 5 years ago. And believing in this organization as well as the providers and the participants, I'm still here and willing to do this because it's so awesome to watch that. So I'd like to introduce Lawrence Medina, who is here and has been back in Rio Grande for the last 5 years. He's been here before that as well and helped bring it back when it was in a time of difficulties to where it is today. So Lawrence, welcome and take over the show.
Thank you, Ted, and buenos tardes, le de Dios, as we say here in the North. Good evening. May God bless you in your days to come. On behalf of the board of directors and staff, I want to thank you all for attending, especially Ted. As Ted shared the vision, I won't go back, but we had a vision about this. And a kind of a side note, we used to go to these they paid a lot paid for these big type of workshops, no disrespect. And I told Ted, I said, we need to bring these to our clients. And you know what? He didn't blink an eye. And that's what I'm so grateful for Ted as our clinical director and what he has brought to Rio Grande to contribute to the healing of those, dealing with addiction and mental health issues. Rio Grande has been in existence since 1978. I'm a former client of Rio Grande. And what that means, I'm in long-term recovery, which I haven't had a drink or drug in 31 years. So I'm a proud product of Rio Grande. I see where some of our clients in their chairs, I sat there at one time 32 years ago, and I've been blessed through recovery. When it comes to the target populations, when Ted and I and the team put this together, and just real quick, I want to thank the Rio Grande staff as well. I know Stead brought that up, but I just want to say thank you because there's a lot that goes into the production of this. When it comes to the target populations, Ted and I talked early on that our primary, there was 3 populations. One was Rio Grande's clients that we wanted to bring topics that probably weren't talked about on a day-to-day basis. Number 2 was professionals. And 3 was the general public. So I welcome you all to this opportunity for healing. And, when we're dealing with substance use disorder and mental health and me in long-term recovery, we know there's a stigma. And when I say stigma, a lot of people some are even at one time I was ashamed of my addiction problem. And you know what? I'm not ashamed today because I understand today that addiction is a disease scientifically. and that we're dealing with the stereotyping, prejudice, and discrimination against people with addiction. Not to get into the politics or the criminal justice. When I broke the law, there was consequences, but dealing with addiction and mental health disorders, there is, recovery is for everybody. Recovery is alive and well in Taos, Las Vegas, Raton, northern New Mexico. And so we hope that, these presentations contribute to your healing, either as a client or professional or from the general public, or even some familia de Ted. It's good to see Barb and Ted's other family members, his brother. It's always nice to see the Wiards. You guys are rock stars in my book, and we're blessed to have your brother Ted on our team. So I'm going to shut up with that, or Ted's going to throw me out. So thank you, Ted. Thank you all, and looking forward to hearing the presentation.
Thank you, Lawrence, and thanks for helping sponsor this and make us all be here in our own ways and give us that avenue to be able to be here. So I also want to thank Melissa, who's the one who keeps everything running and happens to be sitting on my right, as well as all the other pieces that allows us to be here, including the groups. Thank you, Patricia. Thank you, Andy and Andy, and as well as the other groups that are here. It means a lot. And I want to state right up front, each one of us has a choice to be here. Even whatever it is, every single person here chose to be here. And that can take bravery and strength. It can have to override resistance. It's dark, it's cold. Luckily, I did finish my shoveling this morning, but there's many different reasons to not be here, and you chose to be here. So I hope I can help maybe you and me find ways to just improve our quality of life. So if we can go back to the PowerPoint, we'll rock on. And so once again, this is here, and you can look at those numbers if you choose to have them. And the other sponsor of this, I think you can give that to me, Melissa. Okay, well, I'll talk about the other sponsor is Golden Willow Retreat, which is an emotional healing sanctuary focused on grief and loss. It's located in Arroyo Hondo. It's a nonprofit. People come from all over the world and stay with us to work with their different losses and their different situations. We also do a ton of community support, education, as well as helping people in their time of different types. So today we're going to be talking about the 4 quadrants of life. And the way I usually start is recovery is about stories. And one of the reasons grief has kind of lost its power or its magic is we've kind of lost the storyteller. And so recovery is actually sharing, seeing, hearing, and valuing and telling the stories. Within that, we learn hope, we learn resilience, and we learn these different pieces that allow us to go from. Before we go there, and we'll see where we go if we get the Zoom going, but if not, that's okay. Then I'll use the chalkboard, which I always have in the blankie. Okay, so who am I? We'll start with just the education that I have. So I graduated from Taos High School back in 1980, a long time ago, and luckily I still remember that. And then I went off to school, went to a few different schools because I thought college was about sports, but slowly graduated from New Mexico State University with my Bachelor in Science in Education. Came back here, taught school for a while. Later on, I received my master's in grief with an emphasis in counseling with an emphasis in grief and loss. And then later on, with the help of Genevieve, who's here tonight as my assistant, I received my doctorate in leadership behaviors in the midst of change. So all of my academic world has been about how do we work with change? How do we work with loss? I'm also a certified tennis pro, which is important. It's a big part of my life, and I keep that licensure just because I can teach and do those sort of things. I'm also the founder and director of Golden Willow Retreat, like we said, and the clinical director of Rio Grande. So from that education was the piece that helped me be able to talk tonight and be able to have this piece. What I believe in deeply is emotional healing and growth from our world. And that is why I have the bravery to sit here tonight and talk. So I have a huge passion of emotional healing. And it is what my passion is. It's what allows me to do the work I do. It's what led to all of my different educational pieces, as well as many different opportunities. So my story is, in a very short time period, I graduated from Taos High, and then I went on to school. I married my high school sweetheart. We started our life together, and we came back to Taos, where I was a school teacher, and she worked at the good old Taos News, and we started our little dream family. And so we got our jobs, we got a pet, we did all these things. We found out that we were pregnant. We were so excited, and Carrie was on her way. And then I got something called cryptosporidiosis, which I almost died a month before Carrie was born. And from there, I luckily lived, and Carrie was born, but it didn't give much time for grief and loss. We'll come back to that. And because all of a sudden we had this baby. And so we continued with that, and Carrie was born, we started our life, and things were moving forward, and life was heading on, and we were doing our little world and working really hard, and just had a lot of dreams and hope. From there, all of a sudden, we found out that we were pregnant again, and we were so excited and happy. But that ended up being a miscarriage, and it was the first time kind of me and my first wife, Leslie, found ourselves on different paths. I was bummed because I was so excited. She was also bummed, but also she was already in relations in a different way with this baby. So that happened. Luckily, we found ourselves pregnant again. We were very excited, moving forward, and Amy was on her way. And that's when we found out that my brother Richard had died up in Alaska in a shipwreck. That shattered us and it destroyed us, but in a lot of ways we still didn't get to work with that. It just sat there within us because Amy was born. And so Amy was born, and we were excited, we were exhausted, we were trying to do our world. And so these pieces just sat around, these residual pieces of shattering. From that shattering, we started our world. So we had now a 1-year-old and a 3-year-old, and we found out that Leslie had cancer. And she was supposed to live for 7 weeks. Luckily, dancing with that cancer and working with that cancer, she lived for the next 2 years. There's many deaths within a health loss. And so we still continued. And so 2 years later, with a body that no longer could dance with that cancer, she died as well, leaving me with a 5 and a 3-year-old to try to do this world as a single dad with 2 little girls. Braid their hair in the morning, let them go to school, and the teachers would rebraid their hair. And sometimes I'd even show up with a paper bag with their clothes. And so, but the 3 of us started our new life. And with that life, we moved forward and started to work with just how to do this. And we did some moves, some geographical moves, and we became a great team. And then all of a sudden, while I was coaching the Taos Tigers in Albuquerque, there was a car crash that killed both my daughters, Carrie and Amy, as well as my mother-in-law, Rachel. And Carrie lived for a day. Amy died immediately. Rachel died immediately. So I found myself shattered, destroyed, dismantled, and in a full state of trauma. Feeling completely abandoned, completely destroyed, and with nowhere to go. I no longer knew who I was. I didn't consider myself a dad. I didn't consider myself a teacher. I must not be married anymore. And so in that free fall, I really just wanted to die. Luckily, I didn't. I mean that from the depths of my heart. I am grateful for every breath I get to take and every chance I get to grow. I started a journey, and in that journey, it led me to a treatment center, which luckily helped save my life because I had lost my drug of choice called my girls, and there was no dealer. And yes, I would have done anything for one more hit of either one of them. And even today, luckily, I've done my work. I continue to do my work. I feel them with me. They live within me. I breathe for them. So in that, I found myself at a treatment center for 30 days. I got done with the treatment center and I was like, okay, I'm trying to figure this out. So now I got to figure out this God thing. And like a good Aries, an April Fool Aries, and Nathan, I happen to know your birthday is in April as well. Aries just jump, you know? So I was like, okay, I can't figure out this God thing. So I went to ministerial school to figure out this God thing. And so I ended up in North Carolina. Where I spent the next 3 years as a dean at a college while I went to ministerial school to become an ordained minister. In that process, I also met my present wife, Marcella, and Marcella and I met up there. We had similar beliefs in our own different ways. And from there, one day she said, are you ever going to do that grief thing? Are you ever going to do that emotional healing center? So we packed up our bags, we sold everything we had. We took a 1987 beige RV that we called Shotgun Shirley, because every time we put gas in her, she would backfire 2 times and we hit I-40. Worked our way back to Taos, where we started Golden Willow Retreat, an emotional healing center focused on grief and loss and recovery. And so that is how I got back to Taos after leaving. I do want to say I am grateful for Northern New Mexico to the deepest level. I do believe it's one of the reasons I'm alive, because the community here helped support me in different ways, even when no one thought they could support me, and I didn't think anyone could support me because I couldn't support myself. So tonight we're going to talk about where that led to. I do promise you I am so grateful for every moment I have, even when the moment sucks. So even when life is very, very difficult, I am so grateful to have the opportunity to walk a path and have the sanctity of breath that has been given to me. And so even though I have a story, like everyone in this room does, it does not confine and define me. So over the last few years, I've worked so much, well, for the last 25 years, I've worked with grief and loss, and I started to realize, how do we work with sustainability? How do we not just work with abstinence of a substance, a drug, alcohol, or other addictive tendencies? How do we have sustainability in life? And so if we only have one thing underneath us, our platform is rather wobbly. And all of a sudden, if that piece falls, we're going to fall. So I started looking really at the different quadrants so we can have many pillars holding us up. And that's what we get to talk about tonight. So that book you saw a minute ago, that was the book I wrote 10 years ago, Witnessing Ted, The Journey to Potential Through Grief and Loss. I love the picture. I actually found that picture at an art gallery in Santa Fe, and I saw it and I broke down crying, to the point that the gallery owner actually gave it to me. I felt a little guilty for that. But it showed my life and so many people's life of being deep down in that dark hole. But if we do our work, we can climb that ladder and come out of that hole. But just holding on to that ladder is not enough. It's how do we soar like that eagle and move through those clouds to find our true potential. And so Carol and I wrote this book, and you can find it on Amazon.com. If you have a financial issue, let me know, and I will be happy to donate you a book at no problem or cost at all. So I'm not here to market the book in any way. It's a book that I felt if we told it as a story, people could listen, and it's not a get better book. It's really just to be able to have some intellectual handholds, listen to a story, to realize that grief and healing from loss is a natural, normal healing process. This whole talk tonight, if you ever choose, I can give you this site. I wrote an article for U.S. Healthcare. It's a journal, and it's in Houston, New Orleans, and different cities. And once again, because Genevieve is my co-writer on about everything. Genevieve, I want to give you credit as well. So that article, if you ever want, let me know. It's about 10 pages. It's more technical and it kind of is more intellectual because that's who that audience is. It's for doctors. But it's really talking about the 4 quadrants of life and how do we gain that sustainability. All right, let's go on. So we're going to back up a little bit. So here's just me. And so today, scared being in front of you, but I just always had this passion to continue to improve and try to do better and better in my life, to feel the ground more and more, to trust my abilities along with the other ways I find that I am held and not abandoned, so that I am held within Mother Earth, within my spirituality and the different areas. So it's a hard world to navigate. And so my goal is really to just continue to grow. And that's where my passion comes from, is how do I continue to evolve and grow and learn and goof and make amends and step back into alignment and keep finding those different paces, just like our breath, to increase and then come back down, and then to expand and then come back. All right, let's head on. So let's take a second. I'd like everyone to just take a breath, including myself. I've just finished testing negative, but I just finished 2 weeks of very nasty COVID. So I'm really honoring breath heavily today, as it's only the second day I really get to be out in the world. And so if you can take your own breath and relax your shoulders and let go of everything that's going around in the world, because they'll still be there. And just see what maybe you can absorb tonight. And with that, while you're thinking about this and taking a breath and maybe letting go of cognitive dissonance and what's this about and judging it, and just drop into yourself. Think about the different losses in your life, not triggering for you, just honoring who you are. Every single person here is a survivor. Every single person here chose to be here, which means on some level, we're all evolving and growing. And honor that. Let those candles be your heart, your soul. Give yourself credit, because you are here. And with that, let's head on. And so our world does get shattered, and it shatters in many ways. We think we have the perfect foundation, our reality, and we can try to hold on to that, but it doesn't usually work. There's good and there's bad, if you want to use those kind of words, of different shatterings. Some we get excited about, and we still have loss because we're redefining ourselves. And so our world is always in this different movement. And yet we try to be present with the foundation we have in that moment, rather than caught in the past and overwhelmed with the future. All right. And so my world, as we said, shattered when Carrie and Amy died. And this was their last Christmas at a frozen waterfall for their Christmas card. And they still run a lot of my life. A lot of my passion comes from the pain I felt, as well as the legacy I can leave for them. All right. But today, like I said, I'm really excited about this earth we walk and that we're gifted. I do feel autonomy on a good day, interdependence, and through service I can be productive and continue to move more and more to passion. I also get to have emotional sobriety, and personally as well, I also get to have sobriety from substance use disorders. All right. So what is this emotional sobriety? What the heck is it? Well, if you listen to the news today, it probably looks about like the picture there. And we have so many stressors come into our world all the time. So emotional sobriety is learning how to navigate all these stressors and find ways of staying present and responding rather than continuously reacting. Emotional sobriety is where we start to rely on our historical wisdom rather than get caught in our history. So we glean that wisdom from the past to help us make decisions today. The bummer is when we're in relapse with emotional sobriety, we are triggered and we fall back into survival skills that maybe today are non-productive. Addictive tendencies, codependency, and different areas within all of these different areas. And these are all survival skills that our brain, our wonderful brain, learned to keep us alive. They might not all serve us. So emotional sobriety is when I glean my history, but in a present moment, I make decisions to manifest my future. It's also a piece that we've moved away from, I believe, in our world, of taking responsibility, of owning my own emotions and responding rather than blaming and desperately looking for that external rescue. I remember one time in couples therapy, a therapist once told me, I didn't like it at the time. They said, most arguments are fighting for the victim position. Well, that's a real buzzkill when it comes to wanting to argue a whole lot, but it's true, where we're demanding and blaming so we can have something externally rescue us. So we have all these stressors. So emotional sobriety is being able to come from a place where I have serenity within, no matter what's going on externally to my best ability. Not easy, but neither is sobriety. So we work with that, all right. And so tonight I'll be talking a lot about internal locus of control and external locus of control. And so internal peace rather than being dependent on an external rescue. I can sit and hope for peace in the external world all day long. Somebody's going to flip me off today. Somebody's going to get upset with me. There was ice on the roads. I wanted to write this PowerPoint rather than shoveling snow. I didn't even turn on the news today because I didn't know what that was going to say, and I'm sure there's bills in my mailbox. Those are external things that are going to happen. It's how do I keep serenity and come from that internal source and have enough self-esteem rather than demanding and blaming from an external world to rescue me. So it's really looking at emotional world where naturally my brain is going to cognitively and emotionally take me back to a very young child, where I should be able to have that even if I didn't. But then in that, I find my internal locus of control of how do I work with this? How do I have serenity even when there may not be peace, when there are environmental demands put upon me? And so I start to move to how do I empower myself rather than thinking someone will rescue me. Let's head on. And so I love the brain. And I love the brain because I also make it very simple. There's a whole lot of complications and the brain is this amazing thing, but I really love to look in emotional work and sobriety at two pieces, the prefrontal cortex, the frontal lobe, and the limbic part of the brain. And so the wonderful thing of the limbic part, well, the brain is more or less a computer that is trying to move me out of discomfort and keep me alive. So the prefrontal cortex is our bigger part of the human brain. It's where we have empathy, insight, response to flexibility, emotional regulation. I had an awesome client who I couldn't see tonight, but I also blew him off the last 2 other weeks because I had COVID. And he just kept texting me back, God bless and get better. So in that moment, he was coming from his prefrontal cortex rather than being mad at COVID and I was screwing him over. So he was coming from that place of having empathy, of compassion, of being open to realizing Ted's not doing so good and I can send him a few prayers. The limbic brain does not have that world. It's fight, flight, freeze, fornicate, feast, and use. So it's my addiction world, and then it's all the things that keep us alive. All my stimuli first goes into that part of the brain. All stimuli. So we need to know there is a dance there. And then if I can feel safe enough, I move back up to my prefrontal cortex where I can care, where I can be open to ideas, where I can be flexible, where I can have long-term rewards rather than instant gratification. So if we just remember those two parts of the brain as we play with this, because this is where addiction lives, is that limbic part. It's also the work of moving from trauma, which is in the limbic, because my brain, my computer thinks I am going to die or I'm dead. And feeling safe enough to move it up to the prefrontal cortex and realize there's creativity, there are solutions. I am able to be malleable and change. Let's head on. So what is trauma? Well, this picture kind of covers it pretty well for me. So trauma is any time that I actually feel I'm abandoned. So a trauma state means I have some sort of loss, and in this computer, it means I am being abandoned and I am going to die. And everyone says, oh, that sounds too dramatic. Well, in the computer, it's not. There's no sense of humor. So in that free fall, my brain does not categorize. It is just in that free fall. So it's like my brain gets like a 52 card pickup or a puzzle that's been thrown all over the floor. And so trauma is that state where nothing can make sense and I have no grounding. From loss, I will move into a trauma state, maybe quickly, maybe longer. And then I get to move to grief, which is where I'm redefining my new present situation, which gives me the opportunity to heal and grow. So it reestablishes that foundation, even if it's just for a second. But I get to be more and more present. And that's where emotional sobriety starts in. Go ahead, please. I believe in Maslow's hierarchy, definitely. I use it as a therapist. I use it in my own world. And so Maslow's hierarchy is how, just like our brain, of moving from the limbic to that frontal lobe. So to feel safe, I first need to know I can breathe. A week and a half ago, there was one night I was not sure if I would be able to breathe. And it was scary. Okay, luckily I did. I also need food. I need water. I need to have relationship. I need to be able to sleep. So I need to have the basic needs met. Allowing that safety to be there, I can then move into the security of what other areas give me security. I really like having my snow shovel on the front of the house. So when I get up in the morning, I can start shoveling rather than go to the shed and see if a skunk sprays me on the way to a shed. So even to those different levels, I start to find how can I grow, how can I make sure I have food, how can I do those different pieces. Once I have that safety, I can move more into community, loving, healthy sexual intimacy, other types of intimacy, family, friendship, and community. As that starts to come together, because those are human needs, I start to have more self-esteem. I can maybe have the guts to talk in front of all of you tonight. I can start to see other things. I can respect differences in the world. I can maybe learn something from someone else or agree to disagree. But all of a sudden, I know I'm solid. This is where emotional sobriety really starts to be able to take a hold. I don't mind that I'm a dork. Rio Grande ATP puts up with me so much. And it's just who I am. Hopefully I'm still respectful and I do my job and I'm a professional and all those things. But they also know I'm just not going to learn how to use the computer very well. From there, I move to the last phase. Well, maybe not the last phase, who really knows? And that's the morality, creativity, spontaneity, problem solving, connection to a higher power, open to many different worlds, realizing we're all human beings and we're all animals, and how do we take care of this world, and acceptance of different areas. It's also that self-actualized is where I claim I did this. I can take responsibility and be accountable. And so this is Maslow's hierarchy that we're always watching for. Let's head on. And so here we go. And so this is from SAMHSA, which is the big organization that works with alcohol and drugs and recovery. And this is what they came up with as the 8 dimensions of wellness. My little brain would rather have 4, so we'll move it around, but we're really looking at the safety of all these areas that make up a strong foundation. So recovery is a return to a normal state or strength, the action or process of regaining possession of control. I call it autonomy, of something stolen or lost. It might not be what it used to be, rarely is, but now I move forward and I glean the wisdom from my experiences to help me today. So grief is a natural, normal healing process from a loss. Loss comes in many ways. Loss is any time, just like that one foundation has been shattered, and I have to redefine who I am, because who I used to be died. And so that's a big piece. And so the way we do that is working with these different dimensions. All right. And we need both parts of the brain, like I said before. We do need the limbic system. I do need to have the stimuli come in and decide if I'm safe. Hopefully it doesn't get caught in my amygdala. That's a whole different talk. But it doesn't get caught in that trigger state. And I can feel safe enough to get back up into that emotional sobriety area of my prefrontal cortex. But we need both. So it's not trying to have one be more than the other. In the substance use addiction world, we want the prefrontal cortex to be the dominant while the limbic is there to keep us safe. In that world, addiction lives in the limbic. So we want this to be dominant, so we're looking for long-term rewards rather than instant gratification, which means we have to override. And that takes a lot of work, and we continue to do our work. Right on, let's go on. So we do have a grief process, and I'd feel amiss if I didn't talk about it because I believe in it so much. So when we have loss, we move through these different phases. We have denial, and that's insulation. We just can't believe something's happening. Anger, we protest. This isn't what I wanted. I still want it the way it used to be. Bargaining, the shoulda, coulda, woulda. I wish I'd done this. I wish I'd done that. So it's the brain desperately trying to catch on to build a new category and put things together. So bargaining is also the start of moving out of trauma. Depression, and that means in situational depression from a loss, sad, surrender. I realize my world has changed, which means I've moved to acceptance. Now, acceptance doesn't mean everything's great. I promise you, it's not great. It still sucks my daughters aren't here in the physical form. It hurts every day. We had holidays and there's some new triggers. But I acknowledge that fact, and my computer needs to know that it acknowledges this is a fact in my life. And then from Kubler-Ross's, which would be those first 5, I added the unknown. That's for spirituality, forgiveness, self-growth, connection, grace, healing. These things we can't really put in any type of category or say this is how they happen. I don't even think we get to say you must do this. They happen through the natural, normal healing process from a loss. Please remember, loss comes in many ways. And then we have relocation, and that's where we're moving from the past, being in the present of our new definition of who we are, gleaning the wisdom from the past to help us build a future. So we move from a place of futility to choice or autonomy, to gratitude, to passion, to service. Those of you that do 12 steps, you would see how these fit right in there. So now we get to play around with the chalkboard because I love it, and I will call them a chalkboard forever. When I worked at Betty Ford Center, Betty Ford actually bought me a chalkboard. It was so cool because I was the only one that still used chalkboard. So this dry erase thingy that I call a chalkboard, I get to play with, and One of my losses is I don't draw well because I was too busy goofing off back in the 7th grade. And so I'll explain what the pictures are so you don't have to understand that. But we're going to just talk a little bit about what happens in our world. So here's our world. And we have a little flower, and that's us. And we have some ground underneath us. And here's our earth, and we have some sun. And we even get a little bit of rain when we need to be watered, and we start our world. And then all of a sudden, different things start happening to us. So we have different losses, and they come in here. And so you take a second and think about the different losses in your life. Death, divorce, money, location, loss of self, trauma, addiction. And that's just a start. Environmentally, we're living in a world that the earth is really hurting. And then we have generational loss as well. Racism, sexism, all the other isms. So we have all these different losses. So if you'll just take a second, think about just your life, and here you are, this little flower, and within your soil, you start to have these other seeds come in called losses. So if you just play with those and think about the different pieces in your world. The brain's great, but also let's give our own world a little bit of credit because you showed up, so did I. I shared some of my story. I'm not asking you guys to share, but just think about those losses. So these things come flying into our soil. Well, to survive, our brain learns different ways to protect ourselves. So it learns survival skills. Now, in many of the 12-step programs, you might call these character defects. I don't get caught up in semantics because whatever semantics work are great. I like to think of them as survival skills because they came from something so I could survive that moment. They may have turned into non-productive habits and even disease, but they came from somewhere that kept me alive, even if today they might be killing me. So from all of these seeds that we don't really like, we start growing weeds, alcohol, marijuana, other drugs, codependency in unhealthy ways. Interdependency is a different world. Okay, thank you. Rage, control, unhealthy shopping, internet, porn, unhealthy sex, and whatever else popped up that allowed me to survive in that moment. We grow all these weeds from our soil. Now, I like to call it, they've slowly changed the name, but I still like to call it addictive interaction disorder syndrome. Because when you mention AIDS, AIDS, people listen because it's deadly. Addiction as a disease is deadly. Actually, not being sober emotionally is deadly because we get different stressors which cause anxiety, which cause different diseases, which hurts our organs, all these different pieces. So we start to build the survival skills that don't serve us. And usually we don't even know it because we're just surviving. And then maybe some lightning hits or something happens and we become aware of this. But usually we become aware of one. And so it's like, okay, I'm going to stop alcohol. Well, what does my system say? Okay, maybe you'll get lucky and be able to do that. But it just pops over and starts doing meth. And that's why it's called addictive interaction disorder syndrome, is where we're bouncing from different things. It doesn't have to be substance. Japan right now, last I heard, has 6 treatment centers for the internet, for internet addiction. So we're seeing how these different things can pop in different ways. I can rage and have a lot of power. I can be a perfectionist and strive for stuff. I can be a blamer. So all these can come out in different ways. Our work in emotional sobriety is to become aware of these and not just cut off, not just mow the lawn. Because guess what? All this is here, so it rains again, what happens? All the weeds come popping back up again. What we have to do is go in and rototill our soil. And those of you in 12-step programs, this is your 4th step. This is doing a thorough inventory of yourself. Not finding ways to do spiritual bypasses or cognitive bypasses or think I'm better than all of this. But actually go in and rototill this soil so that I have healthy soil, the sun can shine, and my flower can continue to grow and flourish, and also join community with others and start to be a garden that I choose and is healthy. In that I connect and I work my way up Maslow's hierarchy. Problem is there's a few things still missing. Those of you in northern New Mexico, most of you know about irrigation ditches. And we clean those ditches, and what happens right after we clean them? The prairie dogs come and dig holes, the coyotes come and they dig other holes, and the moles come. And so we're always having to maintain our ditches in order to get the nutrients of that water. The same thing in this piece, as we start to have sobriety from these survival habits that are no longer serving us, so we start to have sobriety and abstinence, we need to build the ground rock underneath the soil. And here's the foundation. So we start to have something that holds my soil rather than it just going away, blowing up in the wind, or eroding away and just leaving bedrock. So we need to have something that holds that soil, the bedrock of our life. And so I like to think of that as intellectual, spiritual, physical, and emotional. Now, as I showed you on that diagram earlier, SAMHSA broke it into 8. I've seen it broken into 16. I've seen it do all sorts of different things. One of the reasons I love the book 4 Agreements is because there was only 4. So I'm a good old KISS system called Keep It Simple Student. And so all of these can intertwine, but from here we start to have the 4 quadrants that can hold that soil. Because guess what? The wind is still going to blow. Seeds are still going to pop into my soil. But if I have a foundation underneath my garden, as those seeds come, I can work with them. I can pull those weeds so that that soil stays healthy. So the soil is emotional sobriety. As a behavioralist, I like to think of antecedents, everything before a behavior, the behavior and consequences, the ABC. And the more I think about the things before a behavior, the more positive my consequences are. Please remember, consequences are positive and negative. I worked my butt off to get my doctorate. There's people in this room that can testify to that. And I had to stay with that process. So I had to do those antecedents to have this behavior in order to go and walk that stage and be called Dr. Ted. So that is what we're working with. That's working with the irrigation ditch of how do we hold this, even though we know we can't ask for peace in the external world. How do we hold this internal foundation? And that's where we play with this bottom part, the ground rock. Now, we'll go into some slides a little bit, but of course these are connected. Intellectually, I might need to learn some things in order to understand a God of my understanding. If it happens to be Christianity, I'm probably reading the Bible, and I'm reading other pieces, and I'm going to groups in order to understand that. If I'm a Buddhist, I'm learning more in those areas. So of course that's connected. Well, in order to do that, I better be able to get out of bed. So I need to be physical. And emotionally, I better be into my prefrontal cortex, because if I'm just in my trauma, all I'm thinking is fight, flight, freeze, fornicate, feast, and use. So of course, these are all connected because they are the bedrock that holds my garden called a high quality of life. So playing with this really helped me. Also realizing and surrendering to the fact stuff is going to happen. Something will probably have the opportunity to have me be sad. I know I'll be too tired tonight, so I'm not going to watch the news, because I know something on there is just going to make me sad. Okay, so we watch, and so we know that our garden, our soil, is going to have toxins enter it. But if I have emotional sobriety, then I am the gardener. I own my own world, and I can keep it clean so I can flourish those flowers or food or nutrients that I'm choosing to have, rather than be blocked out with weeds, demanding for an external locus of control, called a lawnmower, instead of going in there and doing the actual soil. So with that, if we can move back to the PowerPoint, and just play with this idea, move it however you would like, have it metaphorically do whatever you choose, and I'm just going to sit in my bedrock. And sometimes we get flooded, and sometimes we get a lot of different stuff in our soil, and sometimes it can be seem overwhelming. That's the trauma. And one piece I will say is, even though we want interdependence and we want autonomy, there's a difference between blaming and demanding an external rescue than asking for support. We do need to be community. We do need to feel safe, and part of that is with us there. So from a foundation, this foundation we were just talking about, these pillars, from that foundation of faith, I'm not talking religiously there, you can if you choose, from that foundation, that trust that we believe in what's underneath us, that emotional sobriety, we actually can step into the unknown called hope and passion. 22 years ago, my wife and I, with $350 to our name, got in a funky RV and came back to Taos, New Mexico to start Golden Willow Retreat. Because we felt we had such a foundation that we could step into the unknown. Doesn't mean I didn't quit growing. There was plenty of growth opportunities forever within that. But all of a sudden, there was enough there that we could step into what we felt was our spiritual path, our passion, my healing. me also having a reason to live and breathe and get up another day. So from those pillars, we start to build that deck. We don't know if there's going to be a hurricane tomorrow, but we have those pillars so we can step into the unknown and have that authenticity, that integrity, and trust. So let's head on. So I've broken them into mentally, physically, emotionally, and spiritually. Samsa has all 8. You can see how they all intertwine, just like that pier did at Nag's Head. So in that, we work with these different areas, and we find ways that we can be emotionally solid. How do we start to have some sort of financial security? And that looks different for every single human being. And how do we connect socially in healthy ways, in groups that are there to support me, not take me down? And spiritually, how do we expand a bigger purpose, something larger than myself? So we find these different ways of working within these dimensions. And so, like I said, I like the idea of 4 pillars. I also put a 5th one in the middle called the unknown. But from there, let's talk about these individually. So let's talk, I believe, about mentally. So when we were talking about Bloom's taxonomy, which I'll keep coming back to, this is from Vanderbilt University. I really like this one. We're still working up to that safety. So I remember, I find stuff from the past intellectually that will help me in the present, not prove I'm still a loser or someone has done me wrong, but I glean those scars of wisdom to help me decide my next step. In that, I start to move forward. And here's where I start to move out of trauma. I start to categorize and I start to have things make sense. And my brain starts to be here rather than trauma doing this. I start to have room to breathe. Then I can take that information of my experiences and put them into use. I find new ways of being, sobriety, a job, being responsible, possibly finally being accountable. Yep, I did it. And now what can I do about it? How do I make amends? Or what do I need to do in my next action? Rather than it being everybody else's fault and the world's just doing to me. I start to move that to what is the world offering me rather than what the world is doing to me. And I still keep synthesizing the data and deciding what really works for me. There's a person in this room and we get to talk on a lot of Tuesday nights about God. I really enjoy it, even if he doesn't always enjoy it. But we get to look and we get to glean from one another and see how it works and what's like-minded and how we've taken the same concept and gone different ways. So we're trying to grow and have connections those ways. And then once again, I pause and say, does this serve me? I like to think of pause, P-A-U-S-E, as pause in Spanish, which is P-A-Z, meaning peace. I pause with all the information I've gathered before I make that next decision. And then from there, I produce. So intellectually, here is Bloom's taxonomy once again, just showing us that piece of growing and growing and growing to be able to create and manifest a future while I live in the present. So we get stimuli, we work with it, we connect with others, we have healthy conversations, we don't try to devour or cower with our intellect. Instead, we try to come eye to eye, see, hear, and value. The person during the break telling the story of the shoe up the nose. We all get to learn something that maybe there really is a shoe up the nose. Those of you that weren't here, it was a Barbie shoe. But we get to see, hear, and value, and from that intellect, start to make other decisions. I believe strongly to move out of the trauma brain, we need some intellectual handholds to stop the free fall. They can turn into footholds, they can turn into that foundation that holds us. So that's our first pillar, no real order, but that's the first one I happen to bring up because I do think personally we need that intellectual to give us that piece of go, okay, that makes a little bit of sense. I might not even agree with it. Okay, so it gives us enough safety to give us action. So we move on to pillar number 2, physical. We have to stay healthy. From our hygiene to our nutrition, to strength, to maintenance, to rest, to movement, to the environment around us. I am definitely a white boy and I better remember my sunscreen. Okay, so I have to use my intellect from my history of when I didn't use it and turned red and hurt to remember my sunscreen. To that kind of level. Also sobriety, of course, of different ways of being sober. And what is healthy for me? Where do I try hard to make sure I'm not manifesting more drama in my life to stay in an anxiety state? Many people, including myself, in an unhealthy day, will normalize chaos, which keeps us stressed and keeps us in that limbic system. And if anyone's working, which I know a lot of us are in this room, working with substance use disorder, the addict wants us to be in chaos because that's the trauma part of the brain, which is where the addict lives. So health becomes huge. Food, fun, intimacy, life, all these natural needs being seen, heard, and valued. So we need to figure out ways to take care of our body, how to connect. Until 2.5 weeks ago, I was still playing tennis every morning I possibly could at sunrise to make sure I had some exercise before I was caught on Zoom the rest of the day. So we play with these ways. Now I don't get to do that, but I found other ways as soon as I get my breath back to make sure I'm staying physically fit. And I'll admit it, I love sugar. And so I also make sure I don't go too cuckoo with it. Tonight for this talk, I had a little Dr. Pepper, and I won't have another one for probably a month. So, and I'm gonna have a little bit of coffee, but I get to do those in moderation because I don't have the disease of addiction in that. I can have addictive tendencies. So luckily, those pieces, I don't have to have complete abstinence, or maybe other places I do. So physically, we need a vehicle. We need this vehicle in order for our soul to walk this world and connect. So let's go on to another pillar. This is the emotional one. And so we can have so many emotions. Here's a piece that just blew my mind. I'll never forget this. I was actually already working at Betty Ford Center at this time as a therapist. And this other therapist walked in one day and he goes, "Emotions are just emotions." I was like, God, that guy's kind of a jerk. And so afterwards I was like, what did you mean by that to the group today? And he goes, "We don't get to control our emotions." I was kind of like, what? And, but I stayed talking with him. And we actually don't. We have the opportunity on a healthy day to control our behaviors that maybe those emotions brought up, called triggers. I can be, Susan, this isn't true, okay? I can be so jealous because Susan has on a ski helmet and goggles and she must be a da-da-da-da-da, okay? And then in my brain, I'm like, what? What's all that about? Okay, so emotions bubble up. It means I've transferred something onto her. All right, so emotions bubble up all the time. And it's the brain trying to release different things and transfer different areas into our world and has triggers. And how we heal these and work with them is we see, hear, and value them. Right now, wow. And then I get to see maybe where that goes, or if there needs to be some action around it. So emotions bubble up. We do not get to control emotions. They just come up. Luckily, the more emotional sobriety we have, the quieter they get. And all of a sudden, there's more room for emotions such as gratitude, love, joy, empathy, connection. I've gotten to see Roberta, who's in this room tonight, so many times in so many ways in my life. And my heart just go warm. And so there's an emotion that bubbled up. It's just an emotion. Berna, the therapist in Vegas, is running an anger management group. Wow. You talk about antecedents, behavior, consequences. If we work with those emotions before we have behaviors from them, we're going to have healthier consequences for our communities. So these are emotions. And so in this, we start to work with what we do with those emotions. I do like the saying, you can always look back, just don't stare, you'll fall on your face. So as emotions come up, I can look at them. I don't have to nurture them, but I can hold them, see them, hear them, and value them, and heal things from my past. And heal traumas so that they can become facts on my lifeline, scars rather than festering wounds. So our emotional health is huge. I like to think if I'm feeling very stressed out, instead of blaming the rest of the world, I'm kind of blunt, I guess. Sucks to be me, so what can I do about it? That's huge. I'm claiming maybe the situation is very difficult. When we found out we had COVID and me and my wife, especially me, started going down so deeply, my brother called me and he goes, "What can I do?" I needed a green chili burrito. Don't ask me why, and so he was able to bring me one safely. So sucks to be me. I can ask for some support. I can keep taking tests. I can make sure I isolate so I don't get anyone else sick. So we do these pieces within our emotional healing, which actually, this is the piece that just excites me so much. I can be working with a present situation that's causing emotional dysregulation, and by being an internal locus of control and being a parent for my own system, I can actually be healing historical wounds. Because I don't believe, this was the one piece I can't back up in literature at this point, in the academic world. I don't believe our emotions actually hold the story. Our computer does, our brain. So anything that felt similar with me taking action today is actually having healing. Genevieve, will you give me a nod if I can share something with you? Because you know I'll be safe. So Genevieve and I went out to a place, actually to where my daughters died. And we went out there on the anniversary of the day. She was in a car crash when she was in high school where she was never supposed to walk again. Genevieve is one of the healthiest people I know. She walks very well. She does things with her body and yoga that just scare the heck out of me and hurt my body. And so she is a very productive person. But we went out there and honored and saw and heard the day that both of us, our lives were drastically changed on a street. Called my daughter's getting hit by a trash truck and her being in a car crash. We don't know how many healings happened within that of even other stories that we might not even know by taking the time to honor the moment, to connect together, to see, hear, and value one another, and then step back into the world today. Thank you, Genevieve, for that. So this is how we do emotional healing, so that historical traumas don't bubble up survival skills that no longer serve us. And so we do emotional regulation. We resource, we find ways, we ask for help, not rescue. We have informal supports. That would be my sister and brother in this room, and Annie, who's another sister. We ask for those informal ways. We ask for formal supports like Rio Grande, Golden Willow, therapists, psychiatrists, clergy, any of those pieces that are more in that professional world. So we ask for all these supports to help hold our emotional pillar. And so we do internal resourcing as well as external. When COVID hit, I had to start playing tennis again because I needed something that moved me and saw so that my peripheral vision came back, and so I focused in because we were doing so much Zoom, and I was also blessing so many people who were dying. I was in a trauma state in parts of my world as I was working with so many families with people dying. So I needed to have that tennis just to let go of that stuff. We also have things like different mental disorders from ADHD to schizophrenia to intermittent explosive disorder. Any of those areas, how do we work with these? And part of it's learning that maybe this is a piece of me, so how can I get the support? How do we work with our grief? How do we move out of trauma? And how do we continuously move triggers so we can have the garden we're hoping for? Which moves us to pillar 4. This one gets touchy for so many people. I'll see how much time I have to see where I take this. In different areas, I get to hear quite often that I don't want to do this because of religion. And so spirituality does not have to mean religion. And religion does not have to mean spirituality. And sometimes they come together very nicely. So we're going back here. This really helped me. I was fighting so hard with this idea of religion and spirituality. It led to ministerial school. I was having such a different situation on that. Hi, Kai. I didn't see you until just now. Because I was in a state after my daughters died that if there was a God, God was evil, but I can't say that because I'll get in trouble, which means I must believe there's a God. And if there's no God, why do I keep asking God for help? But if I'm asking God for help and I think God's evil, and so my brain had no category. So I was in the spiritual crisis of trauma in this thing called spirituality and religion. And I get to say that as a minister because it led to that. So this might just help a few people because it really helped me. We take this Venn diagram and we look at religion and we look at spirituality, and a lot of different things of different people's perceptions could fit into this. So I'm not putting my views up there, well, probably some, but meaning I'm going to be generic because someone might have religion as sanctuary. Someone else might have it as manipulation. Someone else might have it as Jesus Christ, my Savior. Someone else might have it as Buddha. Or the Jewish community. For someone else, it might mean stealing money, pedophilia, social control, safety. So religion could mean about anything, depending on who it is. What I've found is most people agree religion is something that's organized. And I don't mean that negatively, because we do need to commune in all 4 quadrants. We do need to come together. So whatever it means to you and whatever that has, and we can have religious wounding or not, if we can see this religion as a vehicle. that might allow us to move forward. And for someone else, nope. And so I watch so often as people work with different types of sobriety, from substance use disorder to good old emotional sobriety on these different pieces, religion becomes the resistor. It's the barrier to connect. So let's just play with this. Now for spirituality, for some person, it might mean sanctuary. It might mean, usually I get to have you guys yelling at me on different things, peace, yoga, and it might mean crazy people. Or it might mean self. Or again, it might mean connection. And it might mean spiritual bypass. So in other words, everyone's going to have different perceptions of these. What most people will agree with is that spirituality is individualized. It's what goes chunk in my heart. Within this area, which is the more we have emotional sobriety, that pillar starts to arrive. I like religion deeply because it gives me ceremony and ritual. And from that, I can feed my spirituality. I like spirituality because it gives me autonomy. So I can be a co-creator with my higher power of my understanding. And so in this area is each one of our own pillars, and they will be different for everybody. And yet they will also be similar. The gentleman and his wife that I get to talk to quite often on Tuesday nights, we have a lot of commonalities, but we still get to see where those are a little bit different and where they move and how we can grow and how we're working on this pillar. This really helped me to realize that spirituality and religion can go together or they can be separate. It's finding something larger than me. So I'm not caught in my trauma brain playing God on my own path. At Betty Ford Center, one of my jobs was to run the atheist group. So you've got this minister at a treatment center, and what does he get to do? He gets to work with the atheist group to start the day. Well, it means they're already coming in, and because we're being recorded, you can imagine what my two middle fingers are doing right now. That's how I would start my day, is get out of here. But what we could see, because it wasn't my job to change anybody, is they all agreed that they wanted to be good to themselves, in other words, being healthy, to others, and to the earth. And so that group decided that was their pathway to connect to something bigger than them. They could filter their decisions and their emotions through that with their intellect to take their next step. Personally, I like to get big, but that worked for them. It kept them intellectual, it gave them a spiritual path, and it helped them pause to make actions rather than caught in emotions, doing survival skills that maybe are non-productive. And what I do love is I have found, just like my relationship with my daughters and other pieces, I do love that my spirituality and my religious vehicles, my religion, continue to grow. And the geek in me needs that. The intellectual side, the learning from others, reading different ideas and ways. So in this, we start to build something that works for us. And maybe it makes sense to others and maybe it doesn't. But we continue to grow and we grow and we grow, which means we're working up to that final piece of Maslow's hierarchy of connecting on a larger form, or called mindfulness. I took a buffalo hide the other day to my friend's shop, and I called her up and I said, can you clean a buffalo hide? Because it's been being used as a rug and I think that's so wrong. And I want it cleaned up so that I can have it for ceremony. Well, she didn't judge. She didn't say, Ted, you're a white boy, why do you need a buffalo skin? She said, yes, maybe I can help you out. And so these are the things we start to work with in our spiritual process to feel safe enough to step into the unknown. Do I really know why that was so important to me? No. But it was so important to me that I needed to take care of this buffalo hide that's a little bit of a judgment, that's been abused for quite a while. And maybe she can fix it, maybe she can't. But at least I've taken action. So these are the pieces we play in spirituality because I'm connecting. A big piece of spirituality and religion is connecting with others. The Jewish community last year held their Hanukkah special Zoom session. And what the rabbi did is she invited in ministers and clergy and religious leaders, all different places, and we shared on Zoom. There's coming together of finding like-mindedness even in the midst of having different perceptions and ideas, because we're all humans. This is the piece that we need to feel safe enough that we do belong and move up into that higher level of hierarchy. That allows us the opportunity to not be alone. So we'll leave it there for a second. I have not alone right in the middle. Trauma I see as equaling fear, which equals abandonment, which equals death in my brain. So if that keeps me in my limbic system, the whole work is to move up to here. And the way I do that is to realize I'm not alone. Luckily for me, after many, many years, and it will continue to change, I like that part too, is the stronger I feel about spirituality and something larger than me holding me, the more I realize I'm not alone, no matter what's happened. I'm not being abandoned. On a personal level, when I thought God was evil and God was doing all these things to me and the courts were doing all these things to me and this other person was doing all these things to me and everybody was doing things to me, and I was in a trauma state, slowly as I worked on my spirituality, that pillar, I realized no one's doing anything to me, things happen. But in that, if I have a higher power that makes sense to me and understands, in other words, is standing under me, I'm not alone, which means I'm not abandoned and I can stay more in my prefrontal cortex. And so the more we work with that spiritual, religious pillar, the better chance we have of knowing, of feeling safe because I'm not alone. People are going to disappoint me. The world's going to disappoint me. But I continue to nurture that spiritual connection so I am held rather than in that free fall. And the more I do that, the more I get to have the prefrontal cortex be dominant. And the addict doesn't live there. So I can go for long-term rewards rather than instant gratification. All right, let's see what else I have. And I'm almost done, you guys. Thanks for hanging in there so deeply and wonderfully. So now we have the decking. we have those 4 pillars. You also got to see some other pillars. We've poured down some other pieces to have that foundation. So that platform is there, or that garden. I've been using both of those quite a bit. And so all of a sudden, we can now build a deck on top of that foundation because it's not a house of cards. It's not fake. It's not authentic. It's not living on a lie. It is my true, authentic self, which still needs to be nurtured, which still needs to be checked on, which still needs to be taken care of. But now I can build a platform to step in the unknown, called another day, another breath, and manifest from my highest emotionally sober place, rather than wondering if I built that whole foundation on dishonesty and not being authentic and on control, I stay in a trauma brain. And I demand the rest of the world continue to rescue me. Rather than building a deck I can take that next step on and have that self-empowerment and that fulfillment in life that I feel every day. Even when I fail, I'm going to goof, I'm going to fall down. Luckily, I grew up in Taos Ski Valley skiing, and so I fell down and I got back up and I tried to make another turn, and just like that picture I showed. So all of a sudden, we are thriving rather than just surviving. And yes, there are survival days. Yes, and that's where we ask for support. And in that support, we still continue to thrive as a community. All right, let's go on. So we build our deck, and we connect the puzzle. And so we take those 4 quadrants, we come to the end of the day, and with one another to make our foundation, we build a deck that allows us to reach new potential, maybe get in that boat and go for a ride, maybe go for a swim, or maybe just sit down. We don't know the maybe. We're not there yet. We're on this step. Within that, we continue to nurture deeply those pillars. Maybe we go to 12-step. Maybe we find meetings that work for us or other like-minded groups. I know there's many people in this room I can call and say, hey, I have this idea. I emailed 5 people today that I trust deeply because I want to do this article. And I don't feel I'm really maybe appropriate or whatever. So what did I do? I found a community of like-minded people that don't mind letting their geek out and do some intellectual work. And I'm hoping we get to do this article for a textbook. So we find these ways to nurture. Now, please know, I'm not always in it, and I don't think anyone is in balance. There are different times where we will be taking care of one pillar maybe more than another. During my doctorate, which was quite an endeavor, yes, my intellectual side had to definitely be overriding many other areas. Now, I did set that I needed to keep my physical going, so I ended up getting up to 7 miles a day of running to match my intellectual side. But I do believe I got a little fearful many times in that because the pillar of spirituality, and I wasn't quite sure if I was being held. But then I could reach out to community and remind me. And emotionally, I was a mess. Oh my God, what if I fail? What if I... Oh! And then I'd come back. So it doesn't mean we're always in balance, but that's called life. And so we're working with these pillars. I love when I was a elementary teacher, playing hopscotch. So we're playing hopscotch with these pillars, but we're maintaining them. Many people in here have found a religion where they make sure they're connecting to their church and then doing their own spiritual work on there as well. So different people, different ways we need to maintain all 4 pillars and continue to grow. And I think we owe it to our younger people. And in that, I think we owe it, in my beliefs, to a higher power and to Mother Earth and to everything else, because we need to connect because our world's not doing that great. And it starts with us. So if I can build not a war within my own system, and I can start to have serenity here, even if there's not peace out there, maybe that can resonate and help us have more peace and health in the outer world as well. So there's many types of self-care. And so if you just think, and you might make a list, I'm not asking you to do that now. If you're in some groups, you might play with that idea on another night, because I know we're almost done with the group time. Where are you going to put time? Where can you look at ways of self-care which help decreases blaming, demanding for an external rescue, and starting to empower yourself with emotional sobriety to step into the unknown? Because please remember, such as in sobriety, stepping into the unknown might be being sober. I watched a woman decide to take an old Kentucky Fried Chicken store and turn it into a green laundry place, dry cleaner. Genevieve, I don't know if you knew if that was the old Kentucky Fried Chicken. So that's where I used to get my chicken when I'd come from Taos, Texaco, that's now McDonald's. And that's a long time ago. So that's stepping into the unknown. The unknown might be stepping into asking for help. There's a man in here who's a couple times, he's had some big losses this year, and so he's asked me to help them with some ceremonies. If that's an unknown, that's a huge step of faith. So we can ask for support. And so we find the areas we want to do our self-care. Not moving into gluttony, but how do we get our needs met so our brain can feel safe? That allows us to move from a reactionary behavior to being able to respond and manifest a present time. Relapse happens when outdated survival skills are activated and are acted out in the present moment. Any type of relapse. So we have been triggered, we have been activated, and we go back to an old survival skill that gave us instant gratification. And whatever that looks like. It might mean using a substance, it might mean a big pouting, hoping someone rescues me. Each of us have our survival skills that maybe aren't productive, so we start to learn how to survive by being held with our pillars. So that's our relapse prevention, finding the ways that we take care of our soil to have the garden we want. So please reach out. Here's a few numbers. Also think about healthy friends. We don't want someone that just colludes with us. We want someone that tells us the truth, who's going to help us grow. So here's Golden Willow Retreat and Rio Grande's information. Here's my number as well as my email. But as a community, we can come together and hold one another while we each do our interdependent work and be healthy. So thank you very much for letting me talk for 2 hours and kind of look up at the sky because that's where the camera is. So, and I really appreciate everyone being here and taking this time. And I hope maybe a little flashlight gets to go a place that helps you in whatever form or format. So Lawrence, I'll throw it back to you, and then some people I know will have to leave, but I will stay and answer questions or do whatever we need to do.
Thank you, Ted. I don't want to take up a lot of times. I just want to acknowledge our clients. And again, the message that we bring, we hope that you got something out of it, as well as professionals receiving CEUs. I think there's an email, Melissa, if you could put your email, if you haven't already, in the chat, just to get that, just in case you need to correspond to get your CEU certificate. And also we welcome the general public. Please note that we've done many of these videos. And if you go to YouTube to Rio Grande ATP page, You will see past videos of Ted and others with some excellent topics. This video will be available and you could watch it again. And we also have asked to pass it on to other people to help get the message of healing out there. And again, let's give a big round of applause to Mr. Dr. Ted Wiard, our rock star. We're grateful for you, and thank you, brother, and thank you all again. Have a good night.
So once again, thank you so much. Thank you, Rio Grande and Golden Willow Retreat, and all the providers, participants, because it takes us all to be able to make this world work. So let's do our job. Thank you, guys.